of your, some prime time out of your lives to be more effective at working with Latinx clients. I need to begin by expressing how heavy my heart's been since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Our world has changed, and I can feel the way it's knocked the wind out of me. So I find myself still in the process of getting myself back up, getting back on my feet. And it's always important to me to take action, that I use my experience to take action. And as a therapist, being here with you all is a part of that. I want to provide better therapy always with my clients. And part of social justice to me is sharing what I know from my own experience so that others can as well. So I think that, we can hold both the horror of injustice and the resolve to take action and get energized together in community. That's what I hope to do here with you today, to talk about undoing some of the racism and classism that we've been dealing with all of our lives, and taking some time out to learn something new and applying it in a way that makes us part of the solutions in this world. So I would like to start by telling you a little bit about me so that you can get a sense of where I come from in relation to what I have to say, and to give you some context for what we'll talk about today. As you noticed, Alexis was trying to decide whether to call me Henry and Enrique, and I confuse people that way all the time. My given name is Henry. My nickname and my preferred name is Enrique, and that'll I think as we talk about this further, some of the things that I want to share with you and talking about myself will even become more clear and understandable, I hope. My pronouns are he and him, and identify as cisgender, heterosexual male, Latino, Latinx, Chicano, Mexican American, and I identify as a person from the East Side, very much so. Here in Los Angeles. I'm a second generation Latino American, meaning my mother came from Mexico. She immigrated. I'm a first generation college student. My mother had a sixth grade education. My father had an 11th grade education and wasn't able to read or write for most of his life. I have about 5 sisters. I'm in private practice here in Los Angeles. My focus is working with upwardly mobile Latinx clients and BIPOC folks, individually, in couples, in groups. And I also provide consultation for clinicians who are working with Latinx clients, sometimes having a snag somewhere along the way. I'm also on the board of Psychologists of Color, proudly on this board. I'm going to let this person in. And on a few other boards, I'm the co-president of the Group Psychotherapy Association of Los Angeles. And my lens and training, although initially was psychodynamic, and a lot of it still is psychodynamic, I'm principally a Gestalt therapist, and I use a lot of mindfulness in my work as well. I grew up working class, and I consider myself someone who's still in the process of joining the middle class. I can't see any of you. I would be asking you some questions about, whether you're seeing Latino clients and what classes they're coming from. But that's okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and we will go from there. So you can all see this, right? First, bienvenidos, welcome. This is the topic of our workshop today. And I want to just start for a moment by just taking a breath so that we can get grounded and present, more for me than for any of you. Doing this as a person of color and speaking publicly about issues related to race brings up automatically some anxiety about how people may respond to that. Most of us who are people of color have had the experience of talking about race and being dismissed and mistreated in a variety of ways and being traumatized by that experience. So I want to just, recommend to me and to you to just take a deep, gentle breath into our diaphragm or stomach, the way we fill a glass of water, just from the bottom up, and just noticing gravity holding you down onto your chair. Seriously, much more for me than for you. Let's see, I'm going to stop this for a second. I'm going to tell you a little bit about more about my story. As an upwardly mobile Latino myself, to illustrate a bit more about what we're going to be talking about today. So I was born in East LA. I grew up in a suburb next to East LA, and I grew up again working class. My father worked in a factory. My mother cleaned houses. They both did a lot of odd jobs, and I had a few sisters, three full sisters, two half sisters. And while we were all Mexican Americans living in a house, mainly eating Mexican food, we essentially had three different cultures in one home. There was my mother's who came from a small rural village of 400 people in the desert and from pretty extreme poverty. And then there was my father, who was born in the most dangerous part of East LA called Hazard. And he was a East LA sort of Chicano. He also became alcoholic, a workaholic. So I didn't spend a whole lot of time with my father. He was working most of the time. And so these two folks, they had very different cultures. And, but then they had children with a third culture. They had these kids, me and my sisters, who were Americanizing, assimilating children, which is a tough thing to have when you are, especially when you come from Mexico, and play by very different cultural rules. The stress of living with different cultures in one home was overwhelming to all of us. It was filled with conflict. It was a culture war that was the foundation of our discord and misunderstandings. It was being fought one battle at a time. And outside of my family, navigating the world was, I think, even harder. So in trying to survive with an identity, which is something we just need to have in life, I found myself doing a lot of things, but I found myself trying to assimilate as a Latino. So at some point, I learned to walk and talk more white. I wanted to have some success in life. And I had tried that until I realized that I could never be white enough to be accepted in white spaces. So, that pendulum swung for me, and I became a young man who hung out with other Latinos on the streets of East LA, drinking a lot, drinking and driving a lot, and immersed in a culture that didn't even fit me. It was a stereotypical street life. It was much like my father's upbringing. Um, but in that world, I could never be, hard enough and rough enough for those folks. And so I couldn't really fit in with them either. I was confused because those folks had lost so much of their own culture in the favor of a street culture. When I was around Latinos who were actually connected to their culture, like my mother and her friends and her community of people who were working class, usually poor Mexican folks, I also felt completely out of place. Off the bat, I couldn't pass the most important litmus test, which is that although I understood Spanish at that time, I didn't know how to speak Spanish. I eventually did, but that made me feel like and be treated like, a sellout or a coconut. And so I became like many of us, which is culturally homeless. And I didn't have a therapist then. Didn't occur to me, but I didn't have a therapist to help me make sense of what was happening to me, to create a dialogue about what a dialogue that could actually be grounding, that could help me develop an identity or to relieve some of the pressure that I didn't even understand I was experiencing, but I was struggling with it so deeply. It was so painful that at 21 years old, I didn't have a high school diploma. I was the bottom of my classes almost my entire life. With a reading disability, I was depressed, quite severely depressed at this point. Believed I didn't have any kind of a future. Didn't think I could ever make anything of myself. It wasn't even a question of whether it was possible for me. I was the family failure, the family scapegoat, and I bought into it. And I decided to end my life. On the night that I was going to do that, something changed, and I decided to give myself one chance. I actually heard a faint voice, ask me if there may be another way. And I followed it. I decided that the only way out would be to completely change my life, completely. So the next morning, my life began to change pretty starkly. And soon found myself in community college, and I just kept going from there. And in the process of all of this, I had more success along with my education, and that was seen as a betrayal, mostly to my siblings, mostly because I was betraying this very important job of being a family failure, right? That others can be okay in comparison to. And that left me estranged from all of my blood family, including the next generation. And this is a price that many of us have to pay for upward mobility. In this talk, I want to share with you about what I have learned, what I've experienced, and what I've researched in this process as a first-generation Latino college student and a first-generation professional. And I share my story now, not just because it's so unique, but rather because it's so common and so rarely shared. And I'm hoping that it can provide some context to how we understand Latinx clients and how we work more effectively with them. I'm going to share my screen again. Let's see. Oh, here we go. So, the best way to be on the same page in talking about something this important is to start by describing the terminology that we'll be using. So an anti-racist lens is, we need to have an anti-racist lens in order to work effectively with Latinx folks, right? We need an inside-out approach and an anti-racist approach. So racism, I would describe, actually, Dr. Hillard would describe as a system that encompasses economic, political, and social structures, actions, and beliefs that institutionalize and perpetuate an unequal distribution of privileges, resources, and power between white people and people of color. It is normalized, taken for granted, deeply embedded, and works to the benefit of whites and to the disadvantage of people of color. This is also as a longer part of this quote. Anti-racism is simply the active process of taking actions against racism now and actively supporting and expressing anti-racist ideas. Anti-racist therapy is a consistent, active awareness and addressing of systemic racism inside and outside of therapy sessions. It's going beyond the typical trainings and information of cultural competence and cultural humility toward an active undoing of racism by bringing into the therapy a decolonized, BIPOC-centered focus that utilizes BIPOC strengths to overcome the effects of internalized and external white supremacy. Just check something. Oh, here we go. I love this quote by Ijeoma Uola. The beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism to be anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself. And it's the only way forward. So what do we mean by upwardly mobile? And it's simply the act of moving to a higher social class and acquiring greater wealth and status. I often get asked about what terms to use between Latino and Hispanic, and Hispanic tends to refer to Spanish roots and Spanish language. Latino is broader and refers to people and music and culture. It can feel more inclusive, especially for those like myself of Indigenous heritage. So I don't like being called Hispanic. I prefer Latino, Latina, or Latinx. As you know, most of us know, Latinx is gender and LGBTQ plus inclusive. And some people see Latinx as anglicized, gentrified, a changing of the Spanish language by Americans. And I get that point, but the inclusiveness of Latinx to me is it far outweighs that particular issue for me. So here's what we'll be discussing today. I'm going to first go into why this is so important. Then I'm going to talk about some basic Latino cultural values that I think are must-knows. We're going to go into the meat of it, which will be your client's acculturation type, your client's racial identity development, and your client's socioeconomic class. And lastly, we'll finish off with action steps, which are some anti-racist therapy suggestions. Let's see. I do want to briefly mention some basic ground rules or agreements for our talk today. Again, because we're talking about something that, can be charged for some of us. And basically, what I ask of folks is, that you're present, that you listen, you ask questions generously, and that you're part of creating a safe and brave space. I'll do the same. I'll share my experiences, and I'll really try to be engaging. So I'm going to go right into this. I'm going to step right into, I'm going to dive right into why this is so important. It's important for a number of reasons. We won't understand our clients without their context, right? Much of the conversation we'll have today is really about context. We need to attune to racial context. As therapists, we know that we can't understand the foreground of somebody's life without understanding the background, right? Like their history. And the upwardly mobile Latinos like myself, we are minorities among minorities. We're also the folks that you're more likely to see in therapy. Let's see, Latinx clients are unlikely to explain the racial context to you. Therapy is a white middle-class activity, and so we need to make it safe for our Latinx clients and our clients of color. It's also the most effective therapy for Latinos. I want to just share this briefly, and this is something I'd written in a LACPA article, that Latinos in my practice who have seen white American therapists have often reported that those therapists hadn't brought up their culture or didn't explore it in sessions in order to understand how it affected the clients presenting problems or how it could aid in resolving them. Further, most of these Latinos also report that they don't initiate discussion of their culture in therapy either. Some don't think about their culture as related to their current concerns, while many have expressed that they either don't want to make the therapist uncomfortable, or they expect that those white American therapists won't understand. So the next part, well, this is number one actually, that I want to go over is just some basic Latino or Latinx values. It's important to understand these basic values in order to understand us. You can find a long list of Latino values, and I just wanted to share 5, for the purposes of brevity today. First one, and most of us have heard all of this, but family orientation, right? It's a particularly strong prioritization of family, which can provide crucial emotional support, as well as in my case, is a lot of discord when you're moving to a higher social class, right? So a white therapist can easily see us as dependent on our families, too dependent. Or you may think I've often felt like, I've often seen white therapists look at me and feel like they think I'm exaggerating about what I'm saying. And I'm really not, especially in talking about some of the dynamics we can experience with our families. So there's collectivism over individualism, which we don't just look out for me, we look out for us. This is something that is super important. It's so deep in the fabric of who I am that it's hard for me to see things any other way. So we do what's in the best interests of us collectively, right? A Latinx client can get disoriented when we're faced with an Americanized stance of individual achievement, right? Many of my clients have described, and I've heard white folks talk about this, other therapists talk about how frustrated they can get, that, a Latino is whatever age and they haven't moved out of their home. They don't seem to separate or disconnect in some way from their often crazy families. There's relationships, what we call personalismo, which is about establishing good rapport that engenders trust, which comes from showing warmth and care, especially before expecting clients to open up about anything, about any of their concerns. So, that warmth and care can be easily derailed by a neutral, blank slate sort of formal approach. We need to feel who the person is. We're paying a lot of attention to who the person is, much more than we're paying attention to what you have to say. Respect for authority, such as us as therapists. It could look like guardedness or obedience, especially if you're looking at us through an American lens, and looking at us through that lens of assertiveness or confidence. I've been often labeled as quiet, reserved, shy, often when I'm just showing respect, and I'm just not talking over people, all right? Bien educado is the overall description of a Latino who's well-mannered, socially graceful, and emotionally intelligent. It includes the above values, along with living and behaving respectfully. And this, I can't overstate the importance of being bien educado. It's often a Latino guide for living. I know it's deep in my mind and in my soul. It's where I go to decide how to respond to people, to situations, right? So it includes a particular way of behaving in the world. And that it could have positive ramifications. It can have challenging ones as well, especially in a more assertive white environment. So understanding this for a Latino client and how it affects that person inside and outside of therapy can elicit a lot of valuable content and context to a Latino's presentation. The next thing I want to talk about is paying attention to the type of acculturation that a person has embraced and what they've decided, what they've chosen to take on. So assimilation, we've all heard this term, and it's the more common expectation by the dominant culture in which we're expected to leave our culture and our cultural identity in order to replace them with an American culture. And this method of acculturation has been shown to result in lifelong acculturative stress, such as anxiety and more acute problems such as substance abuse, suicidal ideation, and school failure. And that certainly happened to me. They also often exhibit disconnection, shame, and even racist tendencies toward other Latinos. Biculturalism, and I'm really painting with broad strokes here. I'm just providing two the most basic types of acculturation. So biculturalism, on the other hand, here is a highly adaptive strategy to adopting to a host country like this one. So it occurs when a person maintains a healthy and positive connection with their own culture of origin, which allows them to freely and successfully navigate a host country with confidence. It being bicultural, you are able to explore and thrive without threats to your sense of identity. So this is something really important to pay attention to. This is just a Mexican proverb that I absolutely love. They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds. And by the way, this is taken at the Dia de los Muertos celebration in Mexico City. Just absolutely beautiful. The next aspect that I want to suggest attuning to with your client is their racial or cultural identity development, right? So this Atkinson et al. This model is the primary model of all the racial identity theories. It conceptualizes the basic progressions that a person goes through when defining their racial identity or cultural identity. And this can help us understand our clients better, and it can help us guide our questions and our understanding of where our client is in their identity development. Many of your Latinx clients will be right in the middle of working through this. So the first stage in this model is conformity, which I mentioned in my own story. And this is when a person assimilates, believing that whites and their way of life is superior, and that the rest of us are inferior based on the social hierarchy that we've been taught about. So in this stage, a person has a lot of self-depreciating attitudes and beliefs, which is really hard on a person's self-esteem. They can be psychologically divorced from their own group. They can be very critical of their own group. They may not even talk at all about their culture, about their race. Yeah, they may not say anything at all. The next stage would be dissonance, right? And in dissonance, there is conflict that becomes a catalyst to question white culture and to consider their own, right? So there's an interest here in a person's own racial or ethnic group. In the next stage, resistance and immersion, a person is really withdrawing from white culture to delve into their own racial or ethnic exploration in the effort to define a new identity, right? So people, other Latinos can, and other white folks will think you're being a militant. They'll think all kinds of things about you, but it's a natural stage. Whoops. Introspection is the next stage in which we're actively integrating the redefined identity into the dominant culture without compromising aspects of our own racial or ethnic identity. And lastly, we have integrative awareness, right? Which is being able to identify as we wish, appreciating other cultures, including the dominant culture, with ease and balance. I this photo reminds me, in a feeling sense, of something I used to hear my sister say, which is, I hate that I'm Mexican. And it reminds me of the angst um, that you can experience when you're stuck um, in in that first conformity stage, and you're too afraid to ever leave that stage. The It can be painful to be stuck inside of a brown body that you absolutely hate, and being a part of a culture that you hate. So often, even more central to the cultural understanding of Latinos is our socioeconomic class relative to the class that we came from. Socially and upwardly mobile Latinos are often those of us who have come from a poorer working class to a wealthier economic class, such as the middle class, or maybe moving towards an upper middle class. So we've got to pay attention to this. When we have clients and they come from the middle class, you find that they have fewer significant struggles with their ethnic identities. They may not bring it up much. They don't really see it as all that important. They are quite comfortable often with white middle class values, privileges, and individualism. When our clients come from the working class, however, they can typically feel much more Latinx or Latino and have stronger ties to their culture. Typically, second generation Latinos like me, we tend to retain more of our ethnic identification. We have stronger ties to Latino culture, and we may have many struggles that come with crossing the boundary from the culture that we come from and into the freshly minted middle class, or being middle class people, rather. We could be really uncomfortable in white middle class spaces. We can feel alone and outmaneuvered. We could talk about, or your clients may talk much more about resentment and rejection by those in their previous class, and they have to often grapple. I've grappled quite a bit, especially in college, with whether you're a sellout or not. This is a tough phase to get through. Whether we're coconuts, whether we've sold out in some way. And this, for many of us, it's a very difficult and often unique journey. So, like our parents who struggle to get across a border to get to this country, we're immigrating too. We're trying to immigrate into the middle class and cross these other boundaries. This often, for us coming from the middle class, results in high levels of acculturative stress as we cross class boundaries into the middle and upper classes. There's a couple of relevant quotes. Crossing class boundaries from the poor working class to the middle class in a single generation is hard, regardless of race, especially without social capital like networks and mentors. Latinos who are doing so, despite the additional challenges of racism and colorism, are accomplishing an even greater feat. Thus, their stories can provide a highly useful context of strengths and determination in which to view their current struggles. Um, so I'm going to go into suggestions. And I know it's like we're about 45 minutes into this talk, or maybe 40 minutes into this talk. And I just want to invite you to just sort of, move around a little bit if you need to, and stretch a little bit if you need to. Um, we've talked about a lot of the often unspoken aspects of Latinx clients that are really important to attune to in order to understand them. We talked about, or I talked about, uh, uh, paying attention to our cultural values and seeing how they fit for clients, trying to understand them, attuning to the type of acculturation that your client has embraced, paying attention to where they might be in terms of their cultural or racial identity development, and the importance of knowing what class they come from and what class they are trying to move toward. This context can give us the grounding that can allow for some real traction in working with our Latinx clients. So, and going into this last section, I just want to talk about some basic suggestions that that I want to offer to you. So let's go here. So the first one is, to educate yourself, and educate yourself on your own racial and cultural identities. I don't think this could be overstated either, that we've got to really get in touch with what it means to be whatever you are, especially white, and to be a white therapist with your Latinx client. And there's some great books out there, and Me and White Supremacy is a good starter book. There's White Fragility. There's some good books on anti-racism, like Ibram Kendi's How to Be Anti-Racist. There's Resmaa Menakem. Anything by Kenneth Hardy will blow your mind, and will deepen your understanding and appreciation just by being there to listen. And there's also, Janet Helms. There's so many folks. There's so much information. And with this, I want to stress that we don't ask Latinx folks to educate you. There's a certain amount, of education we need with clients in general, but even though, BIPOC folks can be really gracious about sharing things about our culture, it's not what most of us really want to be doing. We appreciate someone that asks some intelligent questions, some thoughtful questions, that is attuning to some of the things that we're talking about today. The next suggestion is to decide on your anti-racist stance, personally and professionally. Learn about, what your dedication is. You could have, for me, I've got some art. You see, I've got some wall hanging that's Latino, and I've got a Yaqui Indian there, because I see a lot of Latino clients, but you could have something small, like I've got a little Dia de los Muertos little thing here. And those little things, when you have something in your office, we see that and we appreciate it. It makes us feel safe that you actually thought about us enough to buy something and put it in your office. Learn about your own implicit biases, the assumptions and associations and stereotypes you hold, often without your conscious awareness. Find out how. You got to learn how it manifests in your countertransference. And it's so important. We're committed as therapists to do no harm. And yet, if we don't do this, we will do harm, right? If we haven't done our own inner work, then you can't work safely with Latinos, right? So even if you are Latino yourself, you need to do your own inner work, because your experience isn't automatically transferable to all Latinos, right? We're just as varied as white folks are. So we've got to pay attention to that. Pay attention to what you feel in your body, what you feel in your mind and emotionally when working with Latino clients. If you find yourself getting really irritated, then that's important to pay attention to. There's something you're not quite understanding. Recognize transference due to race, privilege, class, etc. So notice the transference that may be occurring, right? A client may be idealizing you because of your status, your power, the clothes you can afford, the lifestyle that you may get to have. We may envy your privilege. I can tell you personally, I've envied a lot of white folks for the privileges they have. And it can make us feel inferior. We could put ourselves down. We could be hiding from you in certain ways because we may not feel safe enough. And we could be seeking some safety when there's so much difference in the room. So working with the relationship is crucial. I said earlier, as Latinos, we are trained at having a really excellent felt sense of a relationship. We're paying attention to a person's body movements. We're paying attention to the way they say something. So we're paying attention to whether you're being open, whether you're non-judgmental, whether you're really trying to understand us. Learn about Latinx cultures. There's, values, as I already mentioned, your culturation type and the other things that I mentioned. Learn about their presentation. So for instance, when you're working with, in American culture, we tend to get to the point in a very different way than we do as Latinos. Latinos tend to talk around an issue, right? We can tend to talk around and around and around, and we just get closer and closer and closer to a point. And we can tell a lot of stories, right? And that can look like a therapist who is not culturally aware, like we are being defensive, like we are deflecting, we're avoiding, and often it could just be about safety, but often it's just that this is the way we do things. Sometimes we need to learn how to get more to the point, but at least it's important to question it and understand it as something that's simply cultural and simply different, and to bring it up with regard and with interest. It's so important to initiate discussions of race, racism, class, skin coloration, and to initiate it early. You've got to bring it up early in the therapy. Talk about these aspects, about these aspects of this client and of your own race and culture. Put it all on the table. I know we have different theories, but the therapeutic alliance is so important when you're working with Latinos, and openly talking about these differences with humility can create an opening. It can create the safety and trust that can create more traction in therapy. So we've got to weave our understandings of these things into our therapy, and integrate intersectionalities in our understanding of our client, and check on the Latino client's experience of talking with a therapist of a different culture. You don't want to do it. You don't want to sort of put the onus on your client to have to explain it or to make you feel okay as a person who's different. Don't do that. Don't do that. But do it with cultural humility. Make it a conversation that is safe to have. Your intake forms have anti-racist questions in them, like how important is your race, your culture, class, gender, sexual orientation, or any other area of difference for you? How do these areas relate to the issues you'd like to address in therapy? Or what's your preference and comfort level working with a male white therapist, for instance? Use a bicultural approach. So help your clients explore their experience of living between two cultures and how they can best navigate and integrate them in a way that provides a solid foundation of who they are in the world as they are moving through these phases of their racial identity. We need space to integrate our identities safely, right? This is the only, it's unethical not to do this. Track for signs of acculturative stress and use a trauma-informed approach as needed. Promote boundaries and assertiveness skills that will protect your clients. They're in, we come from a different culture. Our boundaries and assertiveness skills may need to be updated living in this culture. And that's an important conversation to have. Empathize with your client and don't sympathize, right? We don't, often we don't say things to white folks because we don't want them to feel sorry for us in a way that makes us feel like hopeless victims. We need empathy and someone who can see our struggles and our strengths. Don't assume that there's safety. Yes. The next is to create support systems for Latinx folks when possible, right? So Latinx or BIPOC only therapy groups or support groups. Culturally, we're collectivists, right? So we work well in groups. We like to support, we like to be supported. Refer out as needed. If you don't feel like you know just what to do, that you could provide the kind of care that the Latino client you're working with needs, then refer out. Discuss their upward mobility in a white-dominated society. This is their story, right? And help them, encourage them. This part here is sort of a top-down approach as opposed to a bottom-up approach. Sometimes we need to encourage folks to find some mentors. Nobody told me about mentors. I grew up and I've been without them my whole life. And how much of a difference they would have made. Encourage success skills that the middle and upper class folks get to learn, but we don't. Encourage networking, developing connections that they need. These are middle class activities that nobody tells us. And when we don't have those connections, we work 10 times harder and just struggle to get anywhere. Keep history alive. And what I mean is talk about our ancestors, the people before us that got us here, and then our own journey up until this moment. We typically have had some pretty long journeys. and use this information for context, for strengths, and really to keep folks rooted in who they are in this world and in this culture. Get consultation. So, be willing to admit that you don't know certain things, and that's cultural humility, right? So recognize with self-compassion your limits and your own racist programming. We're all programmed with this racism, me included. And refer to Latinx and BIPOC therapists. We have minority-owned businesses, and they're hard to build and they're hard to grow. We're working twice as hard a lot of the time to get half as many of the clients. We may not have developed the networking skills that you may have been taught at a younger age. And so many of us are working so hard. And if we're really being anti-racist, and taking action as an anti-racist, then I really want to encourage that you refer not just your Latino clients. This is a white activity, middle class, and we're trained in it too. So yeah, keep that in mind. And lastly, I just want to go over the summary of the suggestions that I just gave, which is learning about Latinx culture, keeping in mind their acculturation, the racial identity, and class of origin, re-educate yourself and know your stance, review your intake forms, initiate discussions of race, racism, colorism, class, use a bicultural approach, create support systems for Latinx and prepare them for success in white spaces, keep their history alive, get consultation, and that's my presentation. So let me stop this share. So I don't even see any of you at this moment, but I want to invite you, if anybody has any questions, to please ask. Alexis, did you get any questions at all?
No, I'm viewing the chat, but it's just saying send direct messages to Danica. So I'm not sure if people are putting in the chat if we can see it.
Okay. I must be doing an amazing job.
Definitely. You're clear enough to get your thoughts. Well, yeah, thank you so much for the amazing workshop, Dr. Ortiz. And we really appreciate you coming on, and we appreciate everyone else for joining us today. If you do come up with any questions later on, you can always visit his website.
Yes.
What's your website?
Oh, so my website, let me put this up if I can for just a second. Let's see, let me share my screen one more time. Okay, there we go. So my website is Webpsych. My email address is Dr. Ortiz at Webpsych. And on Instagram, I'm Latino Therapy Doc. And awesome. I always welcome questions, conversations at any time.
All right, so all the links have been added to the chat for donations, our Instagram, and for Dr. Enrique Ortiz's links. What really stuck out to me was I really appreciated you sharing your story and, being the child of an immigrant myself. I
Hmm.
definitely understand like the conflict in the household versus assimilating to your peers. And I
Yeah.
definitely think, going to a psychologist or that can relate to you, that's not just like listening from an outsider perspective, but really being able to sit there with you and understand. I think that's so important. And that's really the whole mission
Yeah.
statement of Psychologists of Color. So yeah, I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. I think these our stories are often so invisibilized, but it's so healing for us to talk about them. Um, and it wasn't until my fourth therapist that it was actually ever really brought up by a therapist, right? Who
Mhm.
actually initially like initiated this conversation about my race and culture and my class. And when he did it, I just stopped me in my tracks. I remember holding my breath, and I didn't say anything. I held my breath. Um, I stared at him, and in the silence of this new space, I felt like he had opened a door to me, to something, and he said, "It's safe to come in a way." And in this new space, I exhaled. I took this deep exhale of relief, and I think I hope more than anything that your clients will get to have that experience with you as well.
Well, thank you. Another question I had was just really quickly, besides your website, did you have any other resources for the Latinx community looking for, to find Latina therapists?
Let's see. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm on a couple of great uh, profile sites like latinxtherapy.com, therapyforlatinx.com. Those ones are pretty great. Um, a lot of my clients come through those two sites. And those are the ones I would most. Inclusivetherapist.com is a great one as well. I often get clients through there as well. Those would be my top choices.
Yeah, thank you so much. We definitely loved your artwork that you showed, the
Mm.
photography. I feel like, especially like the Dia de los Muertos,
Mhm.
pictures and like the girl on her knee. I really like the quote you used. They tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds.
That's a
I
great
think
one.
I think that one's really powerful.
Mm, absolutely. I feel that one. That's why I put it there. It didn't even I never it there wasn't even a part of the conversation. I couldn't not.
I did not share something so perfect.
That's right. That's right.
But yeah, thank you so much again. And thank you everyone for joining us again. You can find us on Instagram at Psychologists of Color and on Facebook at Psychologists of Color. And again, if you feel called to donate help, you can keep up with our journey on our website. You can keep up with our journey on our socials. And yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, everybody.